Hello, champs. I hope you all are doing great. My name is Biswajit. I'm your botany teacher. Today, we are going to start another chapter of ecology, and the chapter is biodiversity and its conservation. I have seen many students, they make a mistake, they commit a mistake by neglecting this chapter. But you cannot afford to neglect even a single chapter because you do not know from which chapter and which line of the NCERT the questions will be asked. And we know for sure that a- at least one question from this chapter will be asked, and one question means 4 marks. So you cannot afford to neglect this chapter, even though this is easy. But you have to go through this lecture properly. You have to read the NCERT properly. You have to practice the questions from any of the books which is being provided to you. Okay, so the topics which we are going to cover today are: what is biodiversity, what are the different types of biodiversity, pattern of biodiversity, what is the significance of biodiversity. Okay, we will also talk about the causes of loss of biodiversity and how to conserve the biodiversity, the means of conservation of biodiversity. So these are the things which we are going to cover in this class. So before discussing what is biodiversity, we must know about the levels of biological organism. And the biological organism starts from the level of molecules, biomolecules to be specific. And the biomolecules, based on their size, can be classified into macromolecule and micromolecule. Macro means larger molecules and micro means smaller molecules. And the biological organism starts from the macromolecules. Okay, and the macromolecules like lipid, protein, carbohydrate, nucleic acid, etc., they come together, they get organized in a specific manner to form different types of cell organelles like mitochondria, Golgi body, peroxisome, etc. And these organelles, when they organize in a proper manner, they will form the cell, and the cells, they will come together to form the tissues. A tissue, they will come together to form the tissue system, and tissue system will form the organ of a number of organs. They will come together, they will get organized in a proper way, and they will form the organ system, and from the organ system we will get the individual organism. And a number of individuals of the same species living in a particular area in a particular time period is called as population, and different populations in a particular area will be called as community, and community along with the environment, that will be called as ecosystem, and ultimately the highest level of biological organism is bio. So these are the different levels of what biological organism. And the term biodiversity was popularized by a person, Edward Wilson. And as per Wilson, the biodiversity is not only the existence of different types of organisms, that means different types of species, but it is also, that means the biodiversity also means that the existence of different types of macromolecules in a cell, different types of cells in an organism or tissue, and different types of tissues, different types of organ, different types of individual organisms, populations, community, etc. That means he said biodiversity is the existence of variety or the differences, different types of macromolecules, different types of cells, different types of tissues, different types of organs, different individual organisms, different types of population, different types of communities, different types of ecosystem, and different types of biomes. That means he included the varieties or the differences at all the levels of biological organisms under biodiversity. Okay, so who was the person to popularize this term biodiversity? It was Edward Wilson. Okay, and when I say biodiversity as per Edward Wilson, we should remember one thing, that this is the diversity of the varieties present at all levels of biological organism. We do not consider only at the level of species, we consider at all levels of biological organism. Okay, now, and so we are going to discuss here some of the important or main types of biodiversity. Okay, and the examples are genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecological or community diversity. Then we are also going to discuss alpha, beta, and gamma biodiversity. So what do you understand by genetic diversity? When there is a difference, there is difference in the same species, among the individuals of same species at the level of alleles or at the level of entire genes or chromosome structures, that is known as genetic diversity. So genetic diversity lies within these species. It lies within the species. Okay, and when we look at the different individuals of a same species, we find that there will be some different types of alleles, there may be different types of genes, and there may be some changes in the or the differences in the chromosome structures, and that is known as genetic diversity. And one of the classical examples of genetic diversity is the plant Rauwolfia vomitoria, which is found at the different ranges of Himalaya. And this, from this plant we obtain a chemical which is known as reserpine. Which chemical? Reserpine. And when I obtain this reserpine from Rauwolfia vomitoria, we will find that from different from the plants growing at different levels of Himalaya, we will get different concentration of this reserpine, and different potency will be there of the reserpine. That means, suppose if this is the Himalaya, okay, and suppose these are the reserpine plants. Okay, so you can see these plants are growing at different levels. So the reserpine, suppose from this plant I am getting reserpine 1, from this plant I am getting reserpine 2, and from here I am getting, suppose, reserpine 3. So the amount of reserpine obtained from this plant will be different, and the ability or the capacity, or I can say the potency of the reserpine obtained from these plants will be different. Okay, so and this is because of the genetic diversity. Of the plants reserpine vomitoria. Okay, and another example, some other examples of genetic diversity are, we can say, take the example of rice. Okay, so we can find more than 50,000 different types of genetically different types of rice. Okay, and we can get about 1,000 different varieties of mangoes in India alone. Okay, so these are the examples of what? Genetic diversity. Okay, so what about species diversity? Species diversity means existence of different types of species in an area, in a given area. Okay, and when we look at different ecosystems, we find that different ecosystem will be having different biodiversity. Some ecosystems will be having more biodiversity and some will be having less biodiversity. An example we can see here, the Western Ghats. In Western Ghats, the diversity of the amphibians is more as compared to the Eastern Ghats. That means I'm talking about the diversity of amphibians here. Okay, so which ghat has more biodiversity with respect to amphibian? It is the Western Ghats. Okay, and this species diversity is a product of what? Product of species richness and species evenness. So what do you understand by species richness? Okay, species richness means it indicates how many different types of species are there. That is species richness. Suppose I'm taking two areas. Okay, suppose this is area 1 and suppose this is area 2. So these are two different areas, and suppose in this area 1, suppose I'm having 5 different types of species, and suppose in this area I'm having, suppose, 7 different types of species. So I will say area 2 or ecosystem 2 has more species richness as compared to area 1. Okay, and suppose in area 1, so what do you understand by species evenness? Okay, so suppose I'm taking two areas. Okay, area 1 and area 2. Okay, so suppose I'm taking some species over here. Okay, suppose species P, species Q, and species S, and suppose here I'm taking species M, species N, and species O. So you can see here I'm having 3 types of species, and here also 3 types of species. So I will say both the areas or ecosystems, they have equal species richness. Okay, and when I look at the number of individuals of these species, I found that suppose the number of individuals of species P is 10, species Q is suppose 1000, okay, and species S is suppose 10 to the power 5. Okay, and when I look at the area 2, we have 3 different types of species, M, N, and O, and the number of individuals of species M is about suppose 100, and N is about 110, and suppose O is about 95. Okay, so you can see that the number of individuals in the area of different species in the area A1, they are quite different. They are differing by a large range. But in this case, the difference is very less. So I will say in this area 2, the species evenness is more. But in this area, the species evenness is very low. So I will say in this area, there is species dominance. And which one is dominant one? It is the species Q. Species Q is the dominant one. Okay, so I will say the species richness, species diversity is a product of species richness and species evenness. More is the number of different types of species, more will be the species richness. And if there is more or less similar number of different individuals, individuals of different species, then I will say there will be species evenness. But if there is large differences in the number of individuals of different species, I will say there is species dominance. For example, in this case, the dominant species is Q. Why? Because its number is maximum. Clear? Now, so I have said species unevenness and dominance. I have already explained you. Okay. Now, the third type of biodiversity is ecological or community diversity. So what do you mean by ecological or community diversity? It is the existence of different types of ecosystems in an area. Okay, different types of species in an area is species diversity. Okay, different types of alleles or genes or chromosome structures within the individuals of same species, genetic diversity. Okay, and different types of ecosystems in an area is ecological or community diversity. Okay, and when I look at different countries or different areas, we will find that the ecological or community diversity is also different. Okay, and for example in India, the ecological diversity is quite high. But when I look at the countries which are very small in size, which are also called as Scandinavian countries, for example Norway, Sweden and Denmark, the ecological diversity is very, very low. So I can say the ecological diversity, which indicates the types of ecosystems in that area, can be high or can be low. It is high in larger countries like India, and it is very small in smaller countries like Norway, Sweden and Denmark. Okay, and apart from these three types of biodiversity, like genetic, species and community or ecological diversity, we also have other types of biodiversity. What are those? One is alpha, second is beta, third is gamma. So what do you understand by alpha biodiversity? Alpha biodiversity means the diversity or the variations found within the community. That means how many different types of populations are present in a community, that is known as alpha diversity. Okay, and beta diversity means the differences or the diversity present between two communities. That is beta diversity, and the diversity present among the communities, that is known as gamma diversity. Okay, so within the community alpha, between two communities beta, and among the communities, that means more than two community if I am taking, then that will be gamma diversity. Okay, now, so what is the total known biodiversity on Earth? Okay, so far we have taxonomically studied about 1.7 million species. 1.7 million species, and that is why we say taxonomically known biodiversity is 1.7 million to 1.8 million, you can take. Okay, but as per some scientists, the diversity is even far more than this value. Okay, that is 20 to 50 millions. And as per Robert May, this name is very, very important. Okay, as per Robert May, the biodiversity is about 7 million. Okay, this number of diversity we have studied now, but still there are many species which have to be studied, and they have to be studied and researched. Okay, so as per some scientists, the diversity is 20 to 50 million, and as per Robert May, the diversity is 7 million. And as per Robert May, he says that only 22% of total species have been recorded so far. Only 22%. That means about that you can say three-fourth of the total biodiversity is yet to be discovered, yet to be studied. Okay, and the when I talk about the biodiversity, that includes plant, animal, microbes, every organism we include under it. Okay, and among different types of organisms, which one is the most diverse? It is the animals. Okay, more than 70%, more than 70% of the total biodiversity is by is contributed by what? Animals. Okay, and about 22% is of plants. Okay, and among animals the most diverse one is the insects. Okay, and 70% of animals, they belong to the insects. So why the insects are the most diverse organisms? Because of the presence of exoskeleton. This is one of the main reasons. Okay, and when I talk about the plants, which one is the most diverse one? It is the angiosperm. And the least diverse one is the gymnosperm. So you can write that part here. Okay, so among animals the most diverse one is the insect. In fact, among all organisms the most diverse is insect. Okay, and among plants the most diverse one is the angiosperm. Okay, and the least diverse is gymnosperm. Least diverse plants, or I can say plant group. Least diverse plant group is gymnosperm. Okay, and when I calculate the total biodiversity, we do not include the prokaryotes. We have not included the prokaryotes. Okay, so why we do not include the prokaryotes while calculating the biodiversity? There are main two reasons. First reason is the conventional technique methods which are used to study the biodiversity for different organisms are not useful or not suitable for prokaryotes. The conventional methods what we use to study the biodiversity, to identify the different organisms and to characterize the different organisms, are not useful or suitable for prokaryotes. Okay, this is one reason. The second reason is that because we are not able to culture or to multiply prokaryotes under normal laboratory conditions. So these are the two reasons because of what we have not included prokaryotes under the biodiversity. Okay, now, so what about the biodiversity in India? So in India, we have how many geographical regions? 10. These are the informations which will be asked in your exam. So these values, data, you have to remember carefully. Okay, so 10 different geographical regions are there. Okay, and how much land area is present? It is about 2.4% of world's land area is there. Okay, and what about the diversity? So about 8.1% species diversity of world is present in India. Okay, and how many plants are there then? So about 45,000 species of plants are there, and about twice amount of animals are there. Okay, and as per Robert May, only 22% of the existing only 22% of the total biodiversity is known. So more than, about 78% is yet to be discovered, and that is why we can say that probably this number of, okay, that means 1 lakh plant species yet to be discovered, okay, and described, and more than 3 lakhs of animal species are yet to be discovered and described. Okay, and we know that with the passage of time, the diversity is decreasing. Different types of species, many species, they are disappearing completely, and that is why we can say that nature's biological library is burning even before we catalog the titles of all the books stocked there. Okay, here the biological library can be compared with the biodiversity. Okay, and the titles of the books can be compared with the species. Okay, so let me write that part here. Okay, and the biological library here can be compared with biodiversity. Okay, now what about the mega diverse diversity countries? We know different countries have different biodiversity. Some countries will be having more diversity, some will be having very less diversity. For example, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Okay, so the most diverse country, the most biodiversity diversity country is Brazil, then the Colombia, Mexico, Indonesia. And what about India? It is at eighth position. So you have to remember about first, second, third, and eighth. So these are the numbers. These are the data which you have to remember. The most biodiverse country is Brazil. Okay, then Colombia, then Mexico, and India comes at eighth number. Okay, now, so what about the patterns of biodiversity? What about the patterns of biodiversity? So different types of patterns of biodiversity is known, but the most well known are the latitudinal gradient biodiversity. Okay, so what are the different types of patterns of biodiversity? Latitudinal, altitudinal, okay, geographical, topographical, humidity gradient, etc., etc. But the most well known one is the latitudinal. Okay, that means when we move from tropic to poles, the diversity will change. And at the tropic, the biodiversity is maximum. At the pole, the biodiversity is minimum. Okay, so when we move from low latitude to high latitude, what happens? The diversity decreases. Not only latitude, but also with respect to altitude, the diversity decreases. Okay, so I can write here, when we move from low latitude and low altitude to high latitude and high altitude, what happens? The biodiversity decreases. The biodiversity decreases. The biodiversity decreases. Okay, and we know the area with minimum latitude is tropical area. Okay, so when I compare the latitude of tropical area and temperate area, we know temperate area has little bit more latitude as compared to tropical area. Okay, so why the tropical area has or tropics, they have it has more biodiversity as compared to the temperate area. Okay, so let me explain those points. First reason behind the high biodiversity in the tropical area is high productivity. First reason is high productivity. Okay, and why it has high productivity? Because of various conditions. One, because of the presence of C4 plants. Okay, second, because of the incidence of the more solar energy, okay, which is responsible for the photosynthesis. Okay, and the second reason for the high biodiversity in the tropical area is because in the tropical area, because in tropical area there is no disturbance. That means in tropical area the conditions are more or less constant throughout the year. Over the hundreds of years, that the conditions have not changed. Okay, which allowed different types of species to flourish, to multiply, and to evolve in that area. And that is why in tropical area the diversity increased. Okay, but in temperate area, we believe that frequent glaciations took place in past, and because of the frequent glaciations in temperate area, different species they extinct completely. Okay, and that is why the rate of the increase in the rate, or I can say the increase in the biodiversity was at very slow pace. Okay, and in tropical area, tropical areas are less seasonal and relatively more constant and predictable, which allows the different types of organisms to flourish more and more. So these are the three different reasons because of what the tropics has more species diversity as compared to temperate areas. Okay, now let us talk about the species area relationship. Okay, that means when we increase or when we change the area of exploration, the diversity will also change. Okay, and this was for the first time given by German naturalist and geographical Alexander von Humboldt. Okay, and he did his experiment or research on South American jungles. And when he increased the area of research, he found that the species diversity or the species richness also increased. When he increased the area of explorations or research, he found that the species richness also increased, but up to a certain limit. That means when he increased the area, initially the species richness increased, but after a certain time, the species richness did not increase with the increase in the area. Okay, area. So let us try to draw the graph here then. Okay, so here on the y-axis, in the y-axis, I'm taking species richness. I'm taking species richness. I'm taking species richness. Okay, and for species richness, I will write S. Okay, and on x-axis, I'm taking area. And for area, I'm taking A. Okay, so when we increase the area of study or research, what happens? The species richness also increases. Okay, so it increases like this, but after a certain time the species richness will not further increase. So you can see that when I increase the area from here to here, what happened? The species richness also increased. But from this point, when I increase the area, the species richness remained constant. Okay, and the relationship between the species richness S and the area A can be written here as what? S equals to CA to the power Z. Okay, and on the log scale, I can write that this one as log S equals to log C plus Z log A. Okay, and the graph on the log scale can be drawn like this one. Okay, and this one is indicating what? Log S, just a minute, like this. So here I can write log S equals to log C plus Z log A. Okay, where S is species richness, A is area, Z is regression coefficient or the slope of line, and C is y-intercept. Okay, so what about the value of Z? The value of Z varies from area to area. So if I take small areas, okay, then the value of Z will lie in between 0.1 to 0.2. For example, in Britain, if I am considering the different types of plants in Britain, the value of Z will come in between 0.1 to 0.2. If I take the birds in California, then I will find the value of Z will lie in between 0.1 to 0.2. Or mollusks in the New York state, the value of Z will lie in between 0.1 to 0.2. But if I take larger areas, so in larger areas, the value of Z will be 0.6 to 1.2. Small areas, the value of Z is 0.1 to 0.2. Okay, for larger areas, the value of Z will be 0.6 to 1.2. Okay, the example I have taken here. Okay, so you can see 1.15 is the value of Z for frugivorous. Frugivorous means fruit eating birds and mammals in tropical forests. Okay, now, so what about the importance of species diversity to an ecosystem? Okay, so far we have learned what is biodiversity. Biodiversity is basically the existence of the varieties at all the levels of biological organisms, and the main types are genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecological or community diversity, alpha, beta, gamma diversity. Okay, we learned that. when we talk about the pattern of biodiversity, we learned that latitudinal one is the most known one, and when we increase the latitude or altitude, what happens? The diversity keeps on decreasing. The diversity keeps on decreasing. Then we also talked about the species richness and area relationship. When we increase the area of exploration or research, the species richness also increases, but up to a certain limit. Okay, and this was given by the Humboldt, Alexander Humboldt. Okay, now we are going to talk about the importance of biodiversity to an ecosystem. Okay, so the biodiversity has different importances or significance for an ecosystem. Example, if the ecosystem has more diversity, the ecosystem will be more stable. Okay, that will have more productivity. Okay, that will be having more resilient. Okay, and the health of the ecosystem will be, better. Okay, and the survival of human race will also be favorable if the ecosystem has good diversity. Okay, so what about the stability? What do you understand by the stability of an ecosystem? I said if the biodiversity is high, the stability of the ecosystem will be more. Okay, so when do we say that an ecosystem is more stable or stable ecosystem? If there is not too much of variation in the productivity from year to year. That means suppose in one year, suppose in 2022, the productivity was 50 units, and in 23 suppose the productivity is suppose it is 55 units, and suppose in 21 it is 49 units. So you can see there is a very less difference or variation in the productivity, annual productivity. Okay, so I can say, okay, this ecosystem is having high stability. Okay, second reason is that the ecosystem must be resistant to occasional natural as well as man-made disturbances. Okay, and the third conditions which must be satisfied by an ecosystem to be stable is that the ecosystem must be resistant to invasion by alien species. So if an ecosystem shows very less variation in the productivity from year to year, and if it is resistant to natural as well as artificial, that means I can say human disturbances, and if it is resistant to the invasion of alien species, that ecosystem will be more stable. Okay, and that ecosystem will ultimately have the high diversity. Okay, so I can say here, so if the diversity is more, if the biodiversity is high, the stability of the ecosystem will be more, and if the stability of the ecosystem is more, these are the things which will be happening. Okay, the second thing is ecosystem health. Okay, and the ecosystem health was to explain the ecosystem health, one hypothesis was given by Paul Ehrlich. Okay, and the hypothesis was called as Revert-Popper hypothesis, and he compared airplane with the ecosystem, and he compared the reverts of the aeroplane with the species and the reverts on the wings with key species. Okay, and where we know very well that suppose there is an ecosystem, okay, and it has high diversity. So if we start to remove few species, then the biodiversity will not be affected that much. But if we keep on removing more and more species, then the diversity will be affected. Okay, likewise he said, that means Paul said that when we remove reverts from the when we start to remove reverts from the aeroplane, initially the balance of the aeroplane will not be affected that much. But when we keep on removing the rivets, then ultimately what will happen? The aeroplane's balance will be compromised. Okay, that is why he said when we remove the species from an ecosystem, that means when we decrease the biodiversity slowly, or we can say when we decrease the biodiversity to very small extent, then the ecosystem will not be affected that much. It will be affected for sure, but it will not be affected that much. But when we remove more and more diversity, then what will happen? Species, then biodiversity will decrease to a great extent, and when the diversity will decrease to a great extent, then the ecosystem will be affected very negatively. Okay, and when we remove rivet from an area, suppose the middle, from the middle area of the aeroplane, then that won't be that will affect the aeroplane, but not that much. But if I remove rivet from the wing side, wing area, then the balance of the aeroplane will be compromised to a great extent. Okay, so he compared the rivets on the wing with the key species. So key species or keystone species are those species which are present in an ecosystem at a very low number, but they play a great role in the stability of the ecosystem. Okay, so this is ecosystem health. That means for an ecosystem to be more healthy, the key species, they have to be present in sufficient amount. No doubt they are present at a very low number, but they have to be present at that number. Okay, if you completely remove the or if you decrease the number of key species, then what will happen? The ecosystem health will be compromised. Clear? Now let us talk about the loss of diversity. Okay, so the loss of diversity can be natural, can be mass extinction, or can be anthropogenic extinction. Okay, so what do you understand by the natural extinction of species or natural extinction of the species or biodiversity? The natural in natural extinction, the species, they get lost or they disappear because of some natural causes, and it occurs at a very slow rate. Okay, so in natural extinction, the extinction of the species occurs at very slow rate, okay, and it occurs due to some natural reason, natural causes. Okay, and in this case, the extinction, the number of the species which undergo extinction is very slow, very less. Okay, so during natural extinction, what happens? Some species disappear and other species are more adapted to the changed condition, take their place. Okay, what do you mean by mass extinction? If a large number of species, they get extincted at the same time period, that will be called as mass extinction. If few species they get extinct because of natural causes, natural extinction, which will take place at very slow pace. But if a large number of species they get extincted because of some natural causes, that will be mass extinction. Both are because of natural causes. Okay, here it will take place at very slow pace, here it will take place at fast pace. Okay, here very few species will undergo extinction, here a large number of species they will extinct simultaneously together. Okay, and so far 5 episodes of mass extinction have already taken place. How many episodes? 5 episodes. What do you mean by anthropogenic extinction then? So far we have learned that whether it is natural or the mass extinction, both are due to natural causes. Okay, natural reasons. So if the extinction of species is due to human activity, that is called as anthropogenic extinction. Okay, and the 6th mass extinction of this species is due to anthropogenic extinction. Okay, and this is 10 to 1000 times more faster than the natural extinction. This many times it is faster. So you can imagine how we are affecting the other species. Okay, now, so what are the results of the loss of biodiversity then? Okay, so when we cause the loss of the biodiversity, then the stability of the ecosystem will decrease. And if the ecosystem stability decreases, then what will happen? The productivity will decrease, and there will be large variation in the productivity from year to year. Okay, and it will be not resistant to the invasion of the alien species. Okay, and it will be not resistant to the disturbances created by human being or the natural causes. And that is what I have written here. You can see there will be decrease in the resistance to environmental perturbations like drought. Okay, and there will be increase in the variability of ecosystem processes like productivity, okay, water use, pest, disease cycle, etc. Okay, that means I can say, ultimately I can say that when there is loss of biodiversity, the stability of the ecosystem will decrease. Okay, now, So these are the results of biodiversity. So what are the causes of biodiversity then? There are different reasons for the loss of biodiversity, but there are mainly four reasons. Okay. So one is habitat loss and fragmentation, second is overexploitation, third is alien species invasion, and fourth is coextinction. So these four are called as the evil quadrant. Evil quadrant. Why evil? Because they are responsible for causing the loss of biodiversity. Okay. Now, so what about the habitat loss and fragmentation? No doubt there are four main reasons, four different reasons for the loss of biodiversity. But the most important reason, which is responsible for decreasing the biodiversity to a great extent, is the habitat loss and fragmentation. Okay, so when I talk about the loss of habitat, I can take the example of tropical rainforest. So initially, there was a time when the tropical rainforest uh, occupied about 14% of the Earth land surface. But now it has decreased, and it is now occupying only 6% of the land area. So you can see from 14% to 6%. So how much it has decreased? That means how much the habitat has been lost. Okay, and the Amazon rainforest is known as lungs of the planet. Why? Because it provides about 20% oxygen to the earth. 20% oxygen to earth. Okay, Amazon rainforest comes under tropical area, right? Not only the loss of habitat is responsible for decreasing the biodiversity, but also the degradation of the habitat because of the pollution is also responsible for loss of biodiversity. Okay, so let me give you some examples about the how we degrade the habitats by pollution and how they affect the loss of biodiversity. So when we use the pesticide, the pesticide will ultimately go to the water bodies, okay, along with the runoff water, and the and in the water body, the concentration of pesticide will ultimately increase, and the pesticides will be uptaken by the fishes, and the fishes will be eaten by the birds, and the birds will be eaten by the falcons. Okay, so ultimately what is happening? The pesticide is reaching to the falcons, right? And this lead poisoning, and because of that, the falcon number is going to decrease. The birds number is also going to decrease. Okay, another example I can take is lead poisoning. Okay, which is major cause of mortality means death. Okay, death rate of many species like ducks, swans, and cranes. Okay, so here when I'm taking the pesticide or the lead, they are actually poisoning the habitat. And when we poison the habitat without causing the loss of the habitat, what happens? The diversity will decrease slowly, gradually. And eutrophication of water body drastically reduces the species diversity. What do you mean by eutrophication? Eutrophication means enrichment of the nutrient. Okay, that in the water body, that is known as eutrophication, that will ultimately cause the reduction or the decrease in the species diversity. So let me explain you this part. Okay, so suppose in a water body the nutrient increased. So when the nutrient increases, okay, so if suppose, let me take a water body, and in the water body, suppose the nutrient content increased in the water body. So what will happen? So now the algae will grow at a faster rate in that water body. So there will be rapid growth. There will be rapid growth of algae. Okay, and this rapid growth of algae is nothing but the algal bloom. Okay, and this rapid growth of algae requires energy. It requires energy. Okay, and the energy is used in the form of ATP, and the ATP will come from the respiration. Okay, and for respiration they will require oxygen, and that is why I can say this rapid growth of the algae or the algal bloom will require what? The uptake of O2, uptake of dissolved oxygen. The dissolved oxygen in the water body will be uptaken by the algae rapidly. Okay, and because of that, what will happen, that the concentration of the dissolved oxygen will decrease, and when the concentration of dissolved oxygen decreases, what happens, the oxygen will be available very less at very less amount to the other organisms, and that is why there will be death of, that will cause the death of other species in water body. And when there is death of other species in water body, what is happening, there is loss of biodiversity. Okay, so you can see when there is increase in nutrient, I am saying eutrophication takes place. So because of eutrophication, what is happening, there is loss of biodiversity. The biodiversity is decreasing. The biodiversity is decreasing. Clear? Now, so we have discussed. Okay, fine. So there are 4 different reasons for loss of biodiversity, and the most important one is the habitat loss and fragmentation. So we have learned about loss of habitat. So what about the fragmentation of the habitat? See, so when we fragment a habitat, what happens, those organisms, especially those organisms which require larger areas, or those organisms which migrate from one area to another area, their number will be affected much. Their number will be affected more. Okay, so I can say here that the habitat fragmentation badly affects those organisms which require larger territories, that means larger areas, like mammals, birds, and also the migrating animals. They will be affected more when we fragment the habitat. Okay, when we fragment the habitat. So like I can take one example. So suppose this is a jungle. Okay, so we are having a larger territory over here. And now what you are doing here, you are going to construct a road in the midst of this jungle. So this is the road. So because of the construction of the road, for constructing the road, what did you do? You cut all the trees present here in this area, and that is why this jungle, which was initially one habitat, is now being fragmented into 2 habitats. This one is habitat 1 and this one is habitat 2. Okay, so 2 fragments. Okay, so in this case, what will happen, those animals which require larger territories, or which those organisms which migrate from one area to another area, they will be affected more. Okay, now the second reason of the loss of biodiversity is overexploitation. We, the human being, sometimes we overexploit some other organisms, and that is why they become extinct. Okay, and some of the examples are dodo, passenger pigeon, and Steller sea cow. Okay, and sometimes the invasion of the alien species will cause the loss of the biodiversity in the native area. Okay, here I have given some of the examples. For example, when the Nile perch, which is a predator fish, was introduced in the Lake Victoria of East Africa, what happened? This exotic or the alien species caused the loss of a number of chichil fishes, native chichil fishes. How many? Over 200. Over 200 native fishes, they got extended from that area. Okay, when we talk about the carrot grass, which is also known as Pantherium. Okay, when it came into India as a contaminant with what happened? It eliminated a number of herbs and shrubs from India. Okay, so it was imported. Okay, actually it came as a contaminant along with the wheat, okay, from the European countries. And what happened? This eliminated a number of herbs, and Indian herbs and Indian shrubs. Okay, so that means it decreases the biodiversity. Lantana, which is a shrub we found in the tropical America, which not god, it is got, okay, which got introduced into India accidentally, became a serious weed today that replaced many species in the forest. Okay, and water hyacinth, which is also known as Iconia and which is also known as terror of Bengal. Okay, it caused the death of many species of many plant species and many animal species found in water body. Okay, an illegal introduction of African catfish, okay, for aquaculture purpose, posing a threat to the indigenous catfish in the rivers. Okay, so you can see when we are introducing some organisms from other area, that means the alien species, when they are introduced in one area, then what will happen, the diversity in that area will decrease. And main reason for the decrease in the diversity is because in that area where we introduce the alien species, in that area there is no natural predator for that alien species, and that is why there will be it is very difficult to control the alien species. Okay, and that is why there will be loss of biodiversity in that area. Now, what do you mean by coextinction? So suppose there are two organisms. Okay, so suppose this is organism A and this is organism B. Two organisms are there. Okay, and the association between these two organisms are obligate. So if one partner gets extinct, then the other partner will also get extinct. Okay, so and such obligate associations, I can take the example of what, mutualism. Okay, or I can take the example of parasitism. So if we extend the host, then what will happen, automatically the parasite will also get extincted. Okay, and if we suppose there are two partners, okay, which are showing the obligate association. For example, I take the example of what, pollinating bee and one orchid I can take. Okay, so if this is orchid, suppose this is orchid, okay, and suppose this is bee. So if the bee which is responsible for performing pollination in the orchid, if it gets extincted, then automatically the orchid will also extinct. That is known as co-extinction. So extinction of one partner will cause the extinction of other partner. Okay, this is known as co-extinction. Okay, now, so just a minute. Okay, so we know what is biodiversity, what are the importances of biodiversity, okay, and what are the different reasons of the loss of biodiversity. We have learned that. So how do we how do we conserve the biodiversity? Because biodiversity is so important for us, that is why we have to conserve it at any cost. Okay, so how do we conserve the biodiversity? So the means of so we have different methods of conserving the biodiversity, and they are broadly categorized into two groups. One is in situ, another is ex situ. Under in situ conservation methods, we have hotspot, protected areas, okay, and under protected areas I have sacred groves, sacred lakes, okay, biosphere reserves, national park, and wildlife sanctuaries. Okay, and under ex situ conservation I have sacred plants, home gardens, seed bank, gene banks, cryopreservation, botanical gardens, zoologic park, wildlife sanctuaries. Sorry, wildlife sanctuary comes under what, in situ wildlife safaris. Wildlife safari. Okay, so what do you understand by in situ and ex situ? So if you protect, if you conserve one organism in its natural habitat, that will be called as in situ conservation. If you take out the organism from its natural habitat and if you conserve it in some other place, that will be called as ex situ. If we conserve in its natural habitat, in situ. If you conserve it out of the natural habitat in some other areas, that will be ex situ conservation. Okay, so let's talk about the hotspot. So initially how many hotspots were there? About, initially it was 25, but now it has increased, and now what is the number of hotspot globally? It is 34. Okay, and it occupies about less than 2% earth land area. Okay, so what about the number of hotspot in India? So in India we have three hotspots. What are those? Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. Second, Indo-Burma, and third is Himalaya. Okay, globally, how many hotspots are there? 34. Initially, it was 25. In India, now how many hotspots are there? Three hotspots are there. Okay, so when do you call an area as hotspot? The area must satisfy some criteria, conditions. The conditions are: the area must be having very high degree of species richness. That means a number of species, different types of species must be there. Second is that area must have high degree of endemism. Endemism means endemic species must be there. That means those species will not be found in some other area. They will be present in only in that area. That will that means those. Suppose I'm taking different areas. Suppose I'm taking different areas. Okay, and suppose in all these areas I'm taking different types of organism, and suppose this species A is found only in this area, but not in this area, not in this area, not in this area, and not this in the area. So we'll call this species A as endemic species. So those species which are found only in a specific area or region, not in other regions, they are called as endemic species. Okay, and the hotspot must have high number of endemic species. Third criteria which must be satisfied for an area to be called as hotspot is that there should be high degree of threat which is measured in terms of habitat loss. Okay, so if these three criteria are satisfied by an area, that will be called as hotspot. Okay, that will be called as hotspot. Now let's talk about national park. So in national park, we conserve both plants and animals. We conserve both plants and animals. Okay, and in national parks, grazing, felling of trees, habitat manipulating, cultivation are never allowed. They are not allowed. Nothing is allowed here. In national park, nothing is allowed. Okay, and one of the example of the national park is Corbett National Park, which was the first national park which was established in India. Okay, Corbett Park. Everybody knows this. What about sanctuaries then? Wildlife sanctuaries. Here only animals are protected. In national park, we protect or conserve both plants and animals, but here we conserve only animals. Okay, and in this area, few things are allowed. Here nothing is allowed. Here nothing is allowed. Nothing is allowed. But here few things are allowed, like cultivation of forest products. Okay, harvesting of timber, private ownership. These things are allowed here. Clear? Now, what about biosphere reserve? Biosphere reserve. Okay, so biosphere reserve is also an example of what? In situ method of in situ conservation, which comes under protected areas. Okay, and this in this biosphere reserve, we conserve both plants as well as animals. We conserve both plants as well as animals, and this is the most effective way to conserve plants. Plants can be conserved by different methods, but the most effective way to conserve plants is the biosphere reserve. Biosphere reserve. Okay, and in biosphere reserve, the tribal people are integral components of this system. Integral components of the system. Okay, which one? The tribal people. Just a minute. That means here the tribal people, which are considered as a component of this biosphere reserve. Okay, and in India, how many biosphere reserves are there? 14. How many hotspots? 3. How many biosphere reserves? 14 biosphere reserves are there. And one biosphere reserve has 3 different zones. How many zones? 3 different zones: core zone, buffer zone, and transition zone. Okay, so let me draw the diagram here. So the at the center there is a zone, and this zone is known as core zone. And in the core zone, nothing is allowed. Nothing is allowed. It is left undisturbed. Okay, and the outer region. This outer region is known as what? Buffer zone. Okay, so this zone is core zone, and this zone is buffer zone. Okay, and in this buffer zone, few things are allowed, like research is allowed. Okay, in core zone nothing is allowed. In buffer zone, few things are allowed, like the research will be allowed. And the outermost zone is known as transition zone. This outermost zone is known as transition zone, and in this transition zone, what will happen? The tribal people are allowed to settle down there. Okay, they are allowed to cultivate, to farm. Okay, now what about sacred groves? Okay, we know very well sacred groves, the tracts of forest that are set aside, and all the trees and wildlife within are venerated and given total protection. Okay, so in this case, in sacred grove, we allow the we protect both all kinds of plants, all the kinds of plants which we consider we consider holy. Okay, and the examples of sacred groves in India are Khasi and Jayanti Hills in Meghalaya, okay, Aravali Hills in Rajasthan, Western Ghat regions of Karnataka and Maharashtra, and Sarguja and Chanda and and Bastar areas of Madhya Pradesh. Okay, now Bastar comes under what? Uh, Chhattisgarh. Sacred lakes. Okay, some lakes are also considered very sacred. Okay, so they will be provided complete protection. Okay, so if that lake is provided complete protection, then the animals and the aquatic plants present there will also be also be getting the protection. And the examples of sacred lakes are Pushkar Lake in Rajasthan. Okay, and Kechu Palri Lake in Sikkim. Sacred plant, we know very well. All of us use tulsi, and this is a very good plant. Okay, the scientific name is Ocimum santum. Okay, Rudraksh ficus religiosa. So these are the different plants which we consider very sacred or holy. Okay, and we conserve them. So if we know that this biodiversity is so important to us, then what initiative we have done so far to conserve the biodiversity? Okay, so two summits have been done so far, yet conducted so far yet. One was Earth Summit, and second was the World Summit. Okay, the Earth Summit was held in the year 1992 in the Rio de Janeiro, okay, which is also known as Convention of the Biological Diversity, and the World Summit was held after 10 years. That means in the year 2002. Okay, and it was held in Johannesburg, which is located in the South Africa. Okay, so this was all about this chapter. Okay, so this chapter is completely based on informations, and this is quite easy, and you won't find any kind of problem. But whatever is given in your NCERT, please go through those portions, because you cannot neglect even a single life from the NCERT. Take care. Thank you.